The cup of chamomile had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. The breeze from the balcony carried the salt of the sea. And something lonelier. I reached for the radio, twisting the dial until the static faded into a voice. A woman reading from a children's book. I knew the words before she spoke them. They lived by the sea in a house filled with books. That line used to make Rachel smile. She was 9 when she moved in with me. A child made of questions and quiet grief. She called the attic our lighthouse. We used to sit on that balcony with cocoa and crayons, drawing stories into the margins of the sky. That was a lifetime ago. Now, even her thank you cards came typed. No ink smudges, no doodles, no warmth. Last week, her wedding invitation arrived, a cream-colored card with gold leaf. Her new last name shimmered under the museum's address. But it was her voice, not the card, that left the mark. "Aunt Irene, can you not mention books at dinner?" She'd said it gently. As if I were the one who might embarrass her. As if stories were mothballs and dust. I told her I understood. Then I hung up and sat very still. Even the books seemed to hold their breath. At the reception, I wore the blue brooch Rachel once gifted me for helping her win a spelling bee. No one noticed. I handed her the gift, an original edition of the book her mother used to read her. Wrapped in linen. Tied with a thread of sea blue yarn. She set it aside. Never opened it. Later that night, one of her friends, wine, flushed and careless, whispered. She said it kind of ruined the vibe. That was all. That was enough. I went home. Poured the same tea. Sat in the same chair. And realized the stories I had saved were not welcome. But maybe they weren't meant for her anymore. The apartment still smelled of old paper and lemon oil. It always did. Every shelf in the attic room leaned with books. Stacks on the floor. Spines cracked with love. The windows creaked when the sea wind pushed them open. And the little balcony, it had rust along the railings now, but the view hadn't changed. Waves, rooftops, seagulls, and sometimes, on lucky afternoons, the shimmer of sailboats. That was where I took my tea. One chamomile bag steeped long, no sugar. Just the way my sister liked it. Her photos sat in the kitchen nook, faded but firm. She died young. Left behind a daughter who didn't know how to cry at the funeral. Rachel arrived with a suitcase and silence, and a look in her eyes that said, "Don't leave me too." I didn't. I became mother, aunt, witness, lighthouse. We made up bedtime stories together. One about a fox who built a library in the woods. She used to insist the fox wore glasses, just like me. That fox lived in a house of books. So did we. Our home wasn't large, but every wall was lined with stories. Cookbooks, atlases, children's tales with pages smudged from little fingers. The only screen we ever needed was the big picture window. One year, she gave me a brooch shaped like an open book. Said it reminded her of my heart. I wore it every Sunday, but Sundays changed. Now the brooch sat in a drawer, nestled between unused teacups. And Rachel, she lived 3 hours south, on the 20th floor of a Manhattan tower. Her texts grew shorter. Busy day. Can't talk now. Maybe next week. But I still sent her book recommendations. A poem now and then, a photo of the sea from the balcony. She never replied. I told myself she was busy, important, becoming someone. Then came the wedding invitation, cream cardstock, serif font. It felt more like a formal announcement than a celebration. Aunt Irene, she had said on the phone. Just keep things light. Okay? No book talk. As if books were burdens. As if I were. That night after the call, I stood in front of my bookshelf. My fingers brushed across the worn covers. Some spines leaned in. Others stood tall, defiant. All of them remembered me. I pulled out the old copy of Miss Rumphius, the one with the soft corners and a loose binding. It had her mother's name written in the front. In blue ink. Slanted cursive. That book had lived in our family longer than Rachel had. When she was little, she used to ask me to read it again and again. The world is so full of a number of things. She'd say the line with me, her voice full of wonder, and I would watch her mouth the last sentence, lips barely moving. You must do something to make the world more beautiful. She once told me, That's what I want to be, Aunt Irene. Someone who makes things beautiful. I believed her. She painted watercolor bookmarks for every book she read. She wrote letters to authors she loved and taped their replies on the fridge. And now she didn't want me to speak about books. About stories. What else was left between us? The silence stretched longer than I expected. It settled into my bones like fog. The next morning, I dusted the photo albums. The paper was brittle at the edges. I found one picture of us from her 6th grade graduation. She wore a second-hand dress we'd tailored together at the kitchen table. I remembered how she danced around the room when it finally fit. Like magic, she'd whispered, spinning in bare feet. We'd laughed until the tea boiled over. I turned the page. A note fell out. Crayon on lined paper, written years ago. I love you because you always make space for my voice. I read it twice, then folded it carefully. Put it in my wallet. That day, I walked to the post office with the wedding gift in my bag. The original copy of Miss Rumphius. I wrapped it in linen, soft and cream-colored. Tied it with a piece of blue yarn we'd once used to bind her first diary. Inside, I added a card. No speech, no lesson. Just a line. Some things should be remembered. Then I mailed it. No tracking. No return address. I just wanted her to hold it. To feel the weight of where she came from. And maybe, just maybe, let it remind her of who she once promised to be. The house felt quieter after the package was gone. Not just silent, hollow. Even the creaks in the floorboards seemed hesitant. I tried turning on the radio. The static hissed back, and then a voice read a passage from Whitman. I used to love that voice. That night, it felt like an echo in someone else's home. I turned it off. Instead, I walked to the balcony. The wind off the water was sharp. It smelled of sea salt and rust. I wrapped myself in my sister's old shawl. The one with the lavender stitching. Its wool had thinned, but it still remembered her shoulders. I sat in the chair by the railing, the same one where Rachel and I used to sip cocoa and invent characters from the clouds. Back then, she would point and say, "That one's a dragon librarian." He and I'd laugh and pretend to take attendance. I looked up now. Just gray sky. No dragons. No one beside me. The next morning, I brewed tea. Let it steep longer than usual. I stared out the kitchen window while the kettle whistled. Steam rose, curled, then vanished. Rachel hadn't called. Not to say the book arrived. Not to say thank you. Not to say anything. I cleaned the guest room anyway. Changed the sheets. Dusted the little desk where she once did homework. A part of me still hoped she might come visit before the wedding. Sit at the table. Reach for the sugar with her left hand like she always did. Say, "I missed this place." Say, "I missed you." But the days passed. Quietly. Even the seagulls seemed to avoid my window ledge now. At night, I read aloud to myself, my voice shaky but still mine. Sometimes I'd pause mid-sentence, expecting her laugh, her questions. But the room held only dust and breath. I wasn't angry. Just faded, like the photographs in the hallway. Still hanging, but no one stops to look. Still here, but barely seen. And I began to wonder. When your life becomes someone else's footnote, do you still get to write the final line? The invitation said, "Museum Garden Reception, Cocktail Attire." The words looked elegant, detached. My name wasn't on the main card, just scribbled in blue ink at the bottom of the RSVP, "Aunt Irene, hope you can make it." No call, no real note. Just an afterthought. Still, I packed the linen dress. The one Rachel had once said made me look like someone out of a poetry anthology. I pressed it the night before. Folded the shawl beside it. Tucked the brooch into a little velvet box. It felt strange, preparing for a wedding where I didn't belong. I hadn't spoken to her since the call about keeping things light. I didn't even know who would walk her down the aisle. She'd never mentioned. The bus from Portsmouth to New York rattled the whole way down. The city greeted me with noise and urgency. People moved with purpose, like they were always late for something. I wasn't used to that anymore. A woman at the hotel front desk asked if I was here for the museum event. I nodded. She smiled politely and handed me a room key. No questions, no warmth. At the venue, The garden was stunning. Stone sculptures, orchids, small white lights strung between hedges. Guests sipped champagne and laughed like the world was new. I stood near the edge, one foot on gravel, one on grass. No one noticed. Rachel was radiant, hair swept back, eyes glowing. She looked nothing like the child who once cut her bangs too short and cried in my lap. I waved when she passed. She nodded, briefly, then disappeared into the swirl of conversation and cameras. I found my seat near a small fountain. The place card said, Irene Holloway. It was the only one written by hand. Next to me sat an older man from her fiancé's family. He introduced himself, then turned back to his phone. Dinner came. Toasts were made. Stories shared. None of them mine, none of them hers. No mention of bedtime stories or the fox in the library. No memory of the attic or the sea. Not even a word about the woman who raised her. I cut my food slowly, chewed carefully, swallowed the silence like it might turn into something useful. But it didn't. It just sat there, like a stone, and I realized, in a room full of laughter and light, I had never felt more invisible. The cake was 4 tiers tall, frosted in cream, edged with golden curls. Everyone gathered to watch them cut the first slice. Phones hovered. Flashes blinked like stars. I stayed in my seat. No one asked me to join. No one even turned. I had known her since before she could spell the word cake. Now I was background, a soft fixture. Like the potted palms near the buffet table. A waiter passed with wine. I shook my head. He didn't ask twice. I looked down at my napkin, folded into a precise triangle. My fingers rested on it, unmoving. I could hear someone telling a story about how Rachel met Daniel. How she walked into that bookshop by mistake, looking for a coffee, not a novel. The guests laughed. But I knew the truth. Rachel had lived in bookshops. She was raised in one, almost. Our home was made of them. She used to fall asleep with chapter books under her pillow. She once told me, books are the only thing that don't lie to you. And now, she didn't want them mentioned. Didn't want me to speak of them. Or her mother, or the attic where she learned to read. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing the card I had written. It was simple. A folded paper, one line inside. Stories remember what people forget. I had slipped it into the linen wrapping, with the book. But I wondered now. Would she even open it, or would it be tossed aside like an old pamphlet? Unseen, unwanted. Forgotten. Someone tapped a glass with a fork. The room fell into a hush. The best man stood, tall and eager. He spoke about Rachel's brilliance, her elegance, her worldliness. He thanked her mentors. Listed names I'd never heard. And when he said, she grew up in a house filled with ambition, my breath caught. Not stories, not love, ambition. As if the rest had no weight, I looked down again. My plate still full, my hands resting quietly, and something inside me whispered, you are no longer part of her narrative. After the toasts, music began. A soft quartet at first, then something livelier. People rose from their seats, lifting skirts and smiles. The garden filled with movement. Laughter, clinking glasses, the shuffle of polished shoes on stone. I remained seated. Too far from the music to be part of it. Too close to leave without being noticed. Not that anyone would. The string lights above flickered. I watched the shadows they cast on the linen tablecloth. Swirls of gold and absence. A woman in a silver dress leaned over to ask, and how do you know the bride? Her voice was pleasant, casual. I smiled. I raised her. Her expression flickered. Oh, she glanced away. Took a sip of wine. No more questions. No more interest. I became invisible again. I closed my eyes for a moment. Just long enough to summon a memory. Rachel at 11. Running through the apartment with her new library card. Waving it like a ticket to the moon. She'd said, this means I belong somewhere. I had believed her. I had built that, somewhere, from floorboards and fiction, from bedtime readings and Sunday shelves, and now, she belonged elsewhere. The museum. The marble, the names I didn't know. She belonged to the curated version of herself. One without attic dust or foxes in glasses. I stood up, steadying myself with one hand on the back of the chair. No one noticed. I walked past the buffet. past the tulips arranged in perfect symmetry, past a photograph table I hadn't seen before, frames of her and Daniel, Rachel in Paris, Rachel at Columbia, Rachel in a white coat, smiling beside someone important, but not a single photo from our home, not a single trace of the child I had held through fevers and fears. I found the exit gate slowly, not rushed, just certain. Outside, the streetlight buzzed above the sidewalk. Yellow, warm, indifferent. I pulled the shawl closer around my shoulders. The same shawl her mother once wore the day we buried her. It still carried a faint scent of lavender. And something else. Memory, maybe. Or mourning. I looked back once, through the iron fence. Laughter echoed across the garden. Rachel danced in the glow of curated love, a life perfectly staged. And I stepped away from the light, into the quiet, and whispered to no one, I was here, even if no one remembers. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Thick envelope. No return address. Just my name in embossed black print. I thought it might be a note of thanks, a belated card. I waited until tea was ready before I opened it. The scent of chamomile filled the kitchen. The steam fogged my glasses. I sat at the table, the radio murmuring something about sea temperatures. Then I unfolded the letter. It was from the New England Women's Heritage Foundation. A formal tone. We are honored to recognize the contribution of Rachel McBride, recipient of the 2023 Holloway Fellowship in Community Literacy. I read the sentence again. And again, the words didn't move. My name, there in ink. Holloway Fellowship. I hadn't funded a fellowship. I hadn't even known about it. It wasn't a scam. It wasn't cruel. It was just true. She had taken my name, my legacy, attached it to her project, her Rade Summe, her rise. I looked out the window. The sea was calm, glassy, but inside me, something broke. Not in anger, in recognition. This wasn't an attack. It was a quiet erasure. She hadn't destroyed me. She had rebranded me. Used the weight of my name like a stepping stone. And I had given her that name. Held it like a light in the dark after her mother died. Carried it for decades, alone. I closed the letter gently. No rip, no wrinkle. Just silence. Then I turned off the radio. Even the soft voice reading weather updates felt too loud. I took the brooch from its box. Ran my thumb over its metal pages. Set it next to the envelope. 2 versions of myself. One remembered in bedtime stories. One reduced to a footnote on someone else's award. The kettle clicked off behind me. I didn't move. Just sat there. Listening to nothing. And wondering, what do you do when your name is still spoken? But not by anyone who remembers what it meant. That evening, I couldn't sleep. The apartment felt too still. Even the ticking clock had grown hesitant. I reached for the album on the bottom shelf. The blue one with the hand-stitched spine. Rachel's childhood filled those pages, her first library card, a photo of her standing on a step stool, shelving books beside me. We used to call it playing library. She'd line up her stuffed animals and issue them due dates. Sometimes, she'd find the teddy bear a nickel for, losing a bookmark. I smiled then, a real smile, though it didn't last. I flipped forward. There she was in her high school cap and gown, holding a sign that read, "Raised by a librarian. Trained by love." She made it for graduation. Even her speech had mentioned me. She called me her compass. She said, "My aunt never taught me to chase titles. She taught me to listen." I remembered standing in that auditorium, tears soaking into my blouse collar. She hadn't looked away once while speaking. Now I wondered if she'd ever look back. I turned the page. A dried lupin fell out. We used to press flowers between book pages, then forget where we left them. The flower lay curled, quiet. Its purple faded, but intact. I set it on the table, next to the fellowship letter. They didn't belong together. One was alive once. The other, polished, formal, empty. I wondered who designed the program. Who wrote the blurb beneath my name? Did they know I was still alive? That I still read 3 books a week? That I still signed my name in blue ink, like my sister did? Or was Holloway now just a soft echo, a branding choice, a quaint story behind a modern award? I thought about calling Rachel, not to scold, not to ask, just to reach, but I didn't. Not yet. The silence between us had become something sacred, a kind of museum no one visited. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to open the doors again, not to someone who had already redesigned the exhibits, without asking where the story began. 2 days later, the local paper ran a feature, Rising Voices in Literacy Innovation. Rachel's photo sat at the top, smiling, confident. Below her name, a quote, "I come from a line of educators who valued access over ego." I read it twice. Then once more. I wasn't sure who she meant. It sounded flattering, almost respectful, but also scrubbed clean. There was no mention of my name. No note about the attic lined with books. No memory of the woman who taught her to sound out syllables one curl of ink at a time. Just this vague lineage. A bloodless gratitude. It hurt more than any insult could, because it wasn't cruel. It was polished, curated, marketable. I placed the paper beside the letter. Then I folded the brooch into a handkerchief and placed it gently into my drawer. I didn't want to see it anymore. Not for now. I stepped onto the balcony. The sea moved like a slow breath. The rust on the railing had grown deeper this season. I ran my fingers across it. Let the wind sting my knuckles. The salt air helped me think, or maybe just remember. Once Rachel had asked if she could name her future bookstore, Holloway's. Only if it smells like paper and tea. I told her. She laughed, said it would. Said she'd stock only books that made people feel seen. Now she had a fellowship. Not a bookstore, a polished platform for the same words we once whispered before bedtime. But the difference, she no longer saw me inside them. Not truly, just the outline of something safe to reference. Not messy, not real. I closed my eyes and let the breeze lift the ends of my sleeves. Somewhere down the street, a child shouted. Farther off, a bell rang. The world kept moving. It always did. I stood there until the tea inside grew cold. Then I went in slowly, turned off the light, and whispered to the darkness, "If they can use your name without your voice, what else can they take?" While calling it a tribute, the apartment felt heavier in the days that followed. Not louder, not messier, just heavier. Like the air had absorbed every unsent word I'd swallowed. I found myself moving slower. Meals grew simpler. Toast, tea, the occasional apple. Books I once reached for stayed on the shelf. I didn't want fiction. I wanted silence that didn't ask anything of me. One afternoon, I sat on the floor beside the lowest shelf. It hadn't been dusted in a while. The books there were her favorites. The ones with talking trees, brave girls, impossible maps. I pulled out The Phantom Toll Booth. Its cover was faded, spine torn. Inside the front flap, she'd written, "Don't give this away. This one feels like us." I held it to my chest. Waited for the warmth to come. But it didn't. It just sat there. Like a coat you outgrew but kept anyway. I placed it back gently. The edge of the shelf scraped my knuckle. A small sting. Barely anything. But I stared at the dot of blood for a long time. That night, I couldn't stay in bed. The ceiling felt too close. The sheets too clean. I wrapped myself in a blanket and curled into the old reading chair. The one by the window. The one she'd spilled cocoa on during a thunderstorm in 2007. The stain never came out. But I kept it, because we'd laughed so hard that night. Now, in the dark, the chair felt hollow. I could still smell the faint trace of old wool and lavender spray. But it didn't hold me the way it used to. Nothing did. Around 3 a.m., I stood up, paced the hallway, looked at the photos still hanging there. Some frames had gone crooked. I didn't fix them. What would be the point? Memories couldn't straighten what was bent now. I paused in front of one. The two of us on a carousel. Rachel, age 10, mid-laugh, holding a paperback in one hand and my arm in the other. I looked at my own face in that photo, hopeful, solid. Then I whispered, out loud, into the dark, "Was I ever anything more than a placeholder?" The silence answered. Kindly, cruelly, it said, "You were enough once, but maybe not anymore." The next morning, I forgot to make tea. That hadn't happened in 40 years. The kettle sat cold. The cup stayed empty. I moved from room to room, but nothing called to me. Not the balcony. Not the radio. Not even the books. I stood in front of the mirror longer than I should have. studying the lines around my mouth. The way my shoulders curved forward now, a little more each year. I used to think time was a companion. Now it felt like a curtain, drawing slowly closed. That afternoon, I opened the closet and took out the small overnight bag. Not the big one, just enough for 2 days. I packed a sweater, an extra pair of socks, and a book I hadn't read yet. I left the brooch in the drawer, closed it softly. I didn't leave a note. There was no one to read it. I locked the door behind me. The stairs creaked underfoot, the same way they had when I first carried Rachel up them, 9 years old, eyes swollen from tears. She had clutched a stuffed rabbit in one arm and a backpack of books in the other. Now, only I remained, and even that felt uncertain. I walked 4 blocks to the inn on the corner. The woman behind the counter looked young enough to be Rachel's age. She asked if I was visiting. I said, no, just needed a change of view. She nodded politely and handed me a key. Room 4B. It smelled of bleach and rose soap. The bedspread was stiff, the carpet thin, but the window opened to a sliver of harbor. I sat on the edge of the bed, listened to the unfamiliar hum of another place, trying to feel like home. And I thought, if I disappeared today, who would notice first? The library, the mailman, a notice about unpaid bills. Would Rachel get a call? Would she come? Or would she say? She was old. It was expected. I lay back. The ceiling was white and empty. No shadows from the bookshelf. No water rings from her cocoa mug on the nightstand. Just plain space. And for the first time, I let the question settle. Not escape it, not soften it, just let it be. Was I ever truly known? Or only remembered when convenient? And in that stillness, I wasn't sure which answer would hurt more. The inn was quiet the next morning. No voices in the hallway, just the occasional groan of old pipes. I sat by the window in room 4B, knees tucked to my chest. Below, the harbor was still. Boats rocked gently, anchored but restless. Like me, I hadn't slept much, but I hadn't cried either, just thought. There was no epiphany, no fire, only a strange, persistent calm, as if I had stepped outside my life long enough to see its shape from a distance. And realized there was more space than I thought. I dressed slowly, folded the blanket at the foot of the bed, left a tip on the nightstand and locked the door behind me. The air smelled of rain. Not heavy, just the kind that clung to your sleeves. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I walked past the bakery where I used to take Rachel on Sundays. They still sold the lemon tarts she liked. The sign in the window said, "Family, owned since 1965. I stood there longer than I meant to. Not for the tart, but for the memory of a girl with sugar on her chin, asking if we could start our own cookbook one day. I kept walking until I reached the library. The old one on Mason Street. It looked the same. Gray brick, moss along the north wall, a single light in the upstairs window. I stepped inside. The warmth hit me first. Then the smell, paper, old wood, a trace of coffee. I hadn't been here in years. Not since I retired. The woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Irene?" Her voice was soft, surprised. I nodded. "I wasn't sure you still remembered me," I said. She laughed gently. "Are you kidding? You're the reason I became a librarian." I blinked. That wasn't something I had expected to hear. Not today. Not from anyone. She stood and walked around the desk. "Hannah," she reminded me. "I was your intern. Summer of '99. I remembered her now. Quiet, always shelving the books alphabetically but humming the wrong letters. I smiled for the first time in days. She said, "Do you want to come upstairs? The reading room still misses your voice." The stairs creaked just as I remembered. Each step a memory. The third one always groaned a little louder. I followed Hannah past the biographies and through the tall wooden doors of the reading room. It still smelled like pine polish and thyme. The windows let in a watery light. Dust hung in the air like breath not yet spoken. There were fewer chairs than before, some new lamps, but the corner table by the heater still stood firm. She gestured toward it. I kept it there. No one else ever sits in that spot. I sat slowly, ran my fingers along the edge of the oak. Felt the groove Rachel once carved with a paperclip. A little fox with glasses. I'd scolded her for it, then laughed, because it looked like me. Hannah handed me a slip of paper. A woman donated some children's books last week. Her husband passed. She didn't want them boxed away. Would you mind helping me sort through them? You always knew which ones mattered. I looked at the stack. Dog-eared edges. Covers softened by many hands. I picked up one with a faded spine. The Velveteen Rabbit. I opened to the first page. The binding cracked, gentle but present. Like an old friend clearing their throat, my throat did the same. I nodded. I'll stay a while. Hannah smiled. I'd like that. She left me there, in the hush. The radiator clanked faintly. Outside, the rain had started, soft, steady. I turned another page, traced the pencil marks in the margin. A child had written. This made me cry. I remembered the first time Rachel had cried over a book. Bridge to Terabithia. She was 8. She didn't speak for hours. That night, she asked, why do stories make things hurt and heal at the same time? I hadn't known how to answer. So I told her, because they tell the truth gently. Now, sitting there, years later, I finally understood what I meant. These pages weren't just paper. They were the memory of being seen. Not as useful, not as impressive. Just as you are. Whole, human, worthy. I turned one more page. And for the first time in weeks, I wanted to keep reading. The box of books was heavier than I expected, not just in weight, but in memory. I spent the afternoon sorting them, stacking the ones that still carried wonder, setting aside the ones that felt tired, too broken to keep. Hannah brewed coffee. The scent filled the upstairs like a gentle exhale. Now and then, she'd pass by with a smile, carrying a clipboard or a question. But mostly, she left me alone. Let me be still, let me listen. To the pages, to the room, to myself. I found a small notebook tucked between 2 early readers, worn red cover, no title. Inside were poems, childish, brave, written in colored pencil. One read, books are doors, but some stay shut until someone believes you belong. A no name, no date. Just the voice of someone who once waited to be let in. I set it beside the rabbit book. Later, Hannah returned. You're still here, she said. Her tone wasn't surprise. It was relief. I nodded. I think I'd like to come back. You'd be welcome any day. I hesitated, then asked, do you still run the monthly literacy drive? She lit up. Not really. Not since COVID. Could we start again? Her smile widened. I'd love that. I paused. Then added, but let's do it a little differently. She tilted her head. I want to print stories, I said. Just small ones, for children. Especially those in towns with no libraries. She blinked. You mean, like publish them? Something like that. I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. A strip of blue had torn through the clouds. I don't have much money, I continued. But I have time. And a name. She was quiet for a moment. Then said, that might be more than enough. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. The air between us held something whole. Something unnamed, but understood. Before I left, I wrote on the inside cover of the Velveteen Rabbit. For the ones who still believe stories matter, even when others forget who told them. I left it at the desk and stepped out into the street. The wind had shifted. The scent of sea and lilac filled my lungs, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Back home, the apartment no longer felt like a tomb. It was still quiet, still filled with shadows of what once was. But something had shifted. The dust no longer settled heavy on the shelves. It waited, as if sensing I had returned to do something with it. I opened the bottom drawer of the hallway cabinet, pulled out the box labeled letters and clippings. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years. Thank you notes from former students. A photograph of my sister holding baby Rachel. An article from the local paper. Portsmouth librarian honored for 30 years of service. I spread them out on the floor, not to reminisce, but to map a path. What if my name was being used without voice? Then perhaps it was time to give it one. I made a list on yellow paper. People to contact. Libraries in need. Printing houses that still did small runs. I called Hannah the next day. Told you I'd come back, I said. She laughed. I knew you would. I want to start a project, I said. But not in my name. At least not just mine. There was a pause. You mean like a foundation? No, I said. A gift. Quiet. Ongoing. A pause again. I said gently. Still has that name out in the world. And that's fine. Let her keep the awards. But I'll keep the stories. Silence on the line. Then Hannah whispered. That sounds like you. We met later that week. At the library, in the corner room with the radiator hum. I brought a stack of books. Ones that shaped Rachel's childhood. On top, I placed the notebook of poems found in the donation bin. This is where we start, I told her. She opened it. Ran her fingers across the crooked pencil lines. These matter, she said softly. I nodded. I'll cover the first print run. Limited copies. Soft pages. Big typeface. Stories with wonder. She looked up. What will we call it? I smiled. The Rachel Project. Not to praise her, but to remind the world who she once was, and what she used to believe in, even if she no longer did. The first print run was small, just 50 copies. We chose 3 stories. One was about a mouse who collected lost words. Another, about a girl who could hear trees humming. The third, a fox who built a library inside a hollow tree. I rewrote that one from memory. Rachel used to make up new endings every time we told it. Hannah helped with formatting. Her cousin, a retired art teacher, offered to illustrate. Simple line drawings. Soft ink. Nothing loud. Nothing digital. Just stories meant to be held. We called the series Quiet Pockets. Little folds of meaning for children in quiet places. We used part of my retirement savings. I didn't flinch. This wasn't a legacy. This was repair. We reached out to rural schools in Vermont and Maine, small community centers, mobile book vans. The response wasn't loud, but it was real. 2 weeks after the first delivery, a letter arrived. Handwritten, Dear Rachel Project. It began. My son sleeps with the mouse story under his pillow. He says it keeps the nightmares quiet. I read that line 3 times. Then folded the paper gently, set it beside the fox illustration. At the post office, I mailed another batch. The woman behind the counter smiled. Saw your name in the envelope corner, she said. Are you writing again? I nodded. In a way. Good, she said. We need more of that. More of what? I didn't ask. Maybe she meant kindness. Maybe memory. Maybe just books that remembered the weight of small things. That night, I brewed tea and sat by the window. The stack of envelopes waited beside me. Each one held a story. Each one, a quiet rebellion. Not against Rachel, but against forgetting. Because if a name could be used without asking, then maybe it could be reclaimed without noise, without permission, with dignity. A week later, I returned to the museum. Not during an event. Not dressed for ceremony. Just myself, in a gray coat and soft shoes. The same garden, now quieter. Autumn had settled in. Leaves gathered along the stone path like unopened letters. I walked slowly, not toward the reception hall, but to the east wing, where a small plaque stood by the children's exhibit. It read, in honor of Rachel McBride, for her contributions to literacy. Beneath it, a quote, one I recognized, one I had written once, in a journal Rachel used to read over my shoulder. Stories are how we carry what the world tries to make us drop. She had claimed it, apparently, as hers. I stared at it for a while. Not angry. Just done. I reached into my bag. Took out a sealed envelope. Inside a copy of the Fox story. The first one printed. I tucked it behind the plaque. No note. No signature. Just left it there. Let the words live where the names didn't. As I turned to leave, a child walked past with his father. He pointed at the plaque. Who's that? He asked. The father shrugged. Someone who loved books, I guess. The boy nodded. Like Grandma. They kept walking. And I smiled. Maybe that's enough. I didn't need to be the one remembered. But I would not be the one erased. That evening back home, I wrote the check. Not large, but enough to secure a second round of prints. Hannah would handle distribution. I would stay in the background, where I had always lived best. Later, I updated my will. Left instructions for the project to continue. No foundations, no fanfare. Just softcover books with a small line inside printed by the Rachel Project, in honor of all forgotten voices. That was the phrase I settled on. It felt right. True, like a final page turned with care. I closed the folder, set it back in the drawer, and poured my tea. The steam curled like breath over an open book, and I whispered, not to anyone, but to the quiet. I never needed to take anything back. I just needed to give it forward. It was Hannah who called. Her voice trembled with something between apology and awe. Did you know the Literacy Awards are featuring the Rachel Project this year? I hadn't. I didn't follow headlines. Didn't care for ceremonies. But I listened. She continued. They're doing a panel, and Rachel's been invited to speak. That caught my breath. Not in fear. Just stillness. She called the library. Hannah added. Asked if you'd be there. I said nothing for a moment. Then, what did you tell her? I said you'd decide for yourself. I hung up gently, stared at the postcard still pinned to the wall above my kettle. A drawing of a fox holding a library card. One of the children from Vermont had sent it, unprompted. Just 3 words scribbled in pencil. Thank you, stranger. That was enough. 2 weeks later, I sat in the back row of a midtown auditorium. Rows of polished chairs, stage lights soft and gold, name tags and bottled water. No one knew me. I wore the brooch, the one shaped like an open book. Not as a symbol, just because it was mine. Rachel took the stage 30 minutes in, still radiant, still poised. She wore a navy dress and that calm smile of hers, the one polished by press. They asked her how the project began. She paused, looked down at her hands, then up again. Well, she said. The name was borrowed. A light chuckle rippled through the crowd. She didn't join in. Her voice steadied. It came from someone who once raised me on stories, quiet ones. Ones that taught me dignity doesn't need applause. There was a silence. Not awkward, just deep. Then she said, she isn't in the program today, but I'd like to dedicate this award to Irene Holloway. People looked around. Someone clapped. Then more. But I didn't stand, didn't wave. I stayed in my seat. Let the applause wash over me like a tide I didn't ask for. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like erasure. It felt like restoration. After the applause faded, the moderator tried to speak. But something hung in the room, a quiet, thick, almost reverent. Rachel didn't fill it. She let it settle, let it speak. Then she folded her notes. Didn't read them. Just spoke. She used to tell me, she said, that stories are a kind of home. Not where you're born, but where you are believed. Her voice broke a little on. Believed. No one shifted. No one whispered. No one checked their phones. I watched her carefully. She wasn't reading from memory. She was remembering, really remembering. And I felt no anger, no vindication, only stillness. That rare, quiet knowing that sometimes, to be honored, you don't need to be introduced. You just need not to be forgotten. The panel ended. People stood. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Rachel stepped down, greeting a few colleagues. But I slipped out the side door. No fanfare. No confrontation. Just evening air and the hum of streetlights. I walked 3 blocks to the hotel. Along the way, I passed a small bookstore. Window lit, faint music inside. A child sat cross-legged in the display, reading aloud to himself. One of the books looked familiar, a fox, a hollow tree. I paused, watched his lips move. No one around him, no parent nearby. Just a boy and a book and the belief that it mattered. I didn't go in, didn't need to. I turned back toward the street. Somewhere behind me, a bell above the door jingled. The child had gone, but the story stayed. The next morning, I awoke to an email. From the foundation. No subject line. Just a line of text. Would you allow us to add your name to the record? I stared at it. Read it 3 times, then closed the laptop. No reply. Because my name, my real name, had already been written. In pencil. In margin notes. In the folds of soft pages passed between children. And that was the only record I ever needed. A week after the panel, a letter arrived. Real ink, real envelope, no logo. Just From the desk of Grace Lively, Executive Director, New England Literacy Trust. Inside, a single page. She wrote that she had heard of me for years, that librarians across the state still referenced the Holloway method when training new volunteers, that she had read the Fox story twice and cried the second time. Then, she wrote, "No foundation, no gala, but I wonder, would you consider letting us archive your work? Not for the press, for the children." My hand rested on the letter for a long time. I didn't smile, didn't cry, just breathed, slow, steady. I wrote back that same night, short note, blue ink, yes, but only if the names of the children who contributed to the Rachel Project are listed first. And beneath that, let it be known we don't preserve stories to protect power, we preserve them to protect wonder. A week later, Hannah called. "They've named a reading room after you." I blinked. "In Portsmouth?" "No," she said, almost laughing. "In Burlington. The traveling van partnership. Remember?" I did. Barely. We'd sent them our first batch of stories in soft brown envelopes. No press release, no logo. Just quiet pages. "They want you to visit," she said. "Give a little reading. Something ceremonial." I hesitated, then said, "Only if there's no microphone." She chuckled. "That sounds about right." The day came. I wore my cardigan, brought a copy of the Fox story. When I arrived, a child with loose shoelaces handed me a folded note. Inside, printed carefully, "I like your stories. They feel like my grandma's voice." I kept that one, tucked it into the inside pocket of my coat, and when they called my name, no fanfare, just gentle applause. I stood, walked slowly to the front, opened the book, and read the first line. "In a quiet forest where the wind remembered things, there lived a fox who collected what the world left behind." Then I paused. Let the silence carry it. Let the words settle. And I looked out over the room, small, full, and thought justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks in softly and finds you where you already are. The house has grown quieter, but not emptier. Each silence now feels intentional, not a hollow, but a resting place. I wake without expectation. The tea still steeps the same, chamomile, faintly floral. It no longer tastes like waiting, just warmth. The radio sits on the windowsill, still crackling. Sometimes I tune it in, sometimes I don't. Most mornings, I sit by the bookshelf with a pencil. I mark the corners of stories that need to be remembered. Ones with soft endings. Ones where someone comes home, even if only in spirit. The Rachel Project continues without fanfare. We've printed 6 collections now. Tiny anthologies sent to little towns, waiting rooms, bus depots, shelters. A boy from Maine wrote last week. His letter was barely legible, folded like origami. He wrote, "I didn't know stories could be this quiet. I read them when the world gets too loud." I keep that one tucked inside the first copy we ever printed. The Fox story, still my favorite. One afternoon, I received a photo from a library in Kansas. 3 children sitting cross-legged, passing a book between them. Their fingers pointed at a line that read, "She was old and quiet and wore the same sweater every day, but her stories made the wind stop to listen." I had written that sentence years ago. Now it belonged to someone else. That's how stories work, I suppose. They shift, detach, grow new roots in soil we may never see. One evening, I visited the harbor alone. The wind was soft, the gulls low and slow above the water. I brought no book, no list, no plan. Just myself and a scarf Rachel had once left behind in her teens. She'd claimed it made her look too much like a reader. I kept it anyway, wrapped it around my shoulders, and stood there until the lights blinked on along the docks. I thought of all the things I'd released: control, recognition, being understood. And yet, I had gained something steadier. A self no longer defined by who acknowledged it, but by what it chose to hold sacred. Some nights I still wonder if Rachel thinks of me. Not out of ache. Just curiosity. The way you wonder if the wind ever returns to the same stretch of sea twice. I don't need her to come back. Not anymore. Because what I gave her, and what she returned without knowing, became something better. A circle closed not with forgiveness, but with forward motion. My life is no longer about being remembered. It's about remembering carefully, lovingly, without regret, and offering that memory like a quiet door for someone else to step through. The sun sets earlier now, a softer light through the curtains. Golden, almost kind. I've taken to lighting a single lamp by the bookshelf. No overheads, no glare. Just a gentle glow for reading and remembering. I still write. Not every day, but when something small moves me. A line from an old book, a child's drawing sent in the mail, the sound of rain starting before it touches the window. These things deserve to be kept. Lately, I've started adding dedications to the stories we publish. Nothing long, just a sentence or two. To the ones who stayed quiet, but never stopped watching. Or, for the reader in the back row, we saw you. I don't sign them. No one needs to know where they came from. That's the gift of storytelling. It's the voice that matters, not the name. The Rachel Project has now reached 30 states. We don't track clicks. We track thank you notes and library bulletin boards with little handprints and tape marks. That's enough. Yesterday, Hannah dropped by. She brought lemon cookies and a letter. One of the first children who read our books, now in college, had written back. She said the fox story helped her believe in softness again, and that she now runs a reading circle at a women's shelter. I don't tell them where the stories come from, she wrote. Just that they're old and true and kind. That made me smile. Old, true, kind, I can live with that. As she was leaving, Hannah paused by the door. Do you want to do one last collection? She asked. Maybe something about endings. I thought for a moment, then shook my head gently. No, I said. Let's do one about beginnings. She nodded. And that was that. Tonight, I sit by the open window. A breeze rolls in from the sea. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. And from the hallway, the creak of my floorboard reminds me. This home remembers everything, even when no one else does. And I think, maybe legacy isn't something we leave behind. Maybe it's something we pass forward while still alive, quietly, deliberately, like a thread slipped from one palm to another. And so, to you, listening now, what is the story only you can carry? What memory still lives in your hands? Has anyone ever tried to silence your name? To erase your pages? Then this space is yours. We invite you to leave something behind in the comments. Or better yet, to pass something forward. Because the world may forget. But we don't have to. You are not alone in your journey. Your voice matters here. Your silence, too. Subscribe to Kamar FM, where every story is a second chance.